And welcome everyone. Now that we're recording, we're really excited to share with you today's session from 12 to 1 about understanding the different options that exist if you're looking to start or scale up a mission-driven organization, especially the legal and the business model options. So hope this will be a useful info session. To start off, our goals for today, first of all, are to give you kind of a good overview of the universe of options, because there's many different ways to go about creating or scaling up a mission-driven organization. And it can definitely feel pretty overwhelming, we know from experience, but we want to give you some useful overview of options, some tips about how to think about what is the right path for you. And then also dispel maybe a few misconceptions that might exist around what it means to be a mission-driven organization. And basically the format for today, we'll have about 25 minutes of presentation between Margaret and I, sharing the presentation, giving you the legal options, business model, examples of some hybrid organizations. And then we'll make sure to have at least 10 minutes for discussion, because I'm sure some of you have questions. So definitely make note of your questions in the chat or here in writing as we go, and we'll make sure to discuss. But the good news is that both Margaret and I are also very interested to offer follow-up support whenever possible, both in kind of coaching and consulting capacities. So in the end, we'll talk about how to stay in touch with us and how to continue on your journey wherever you may be in the process. So before I ask Margaret to introduce herself, actually, why don't we just hear from one or two people in person and online? Why did you come to today's session? Feel free to just unmute yourself online. Maybe we can start with one or two people. How did you hear about this and why did you come? And then we will continue. So, any brave souls today?
Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Willett, and I am the president and CEO of Crown Agents USA, which is a subsidiary entity to our parent company in the United Kingdom, Crown Agents. And I just love learning more about, sort of legal structures. We have really funky governance model in our company and group of companies. So I was just hanging in here to listen, really excited to participate.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you, Amanda. Cool. Someone else online, do you want to just say hello and what you're joining for today? Yeah.
I can share. Hi, everyone. My name is Shakira Rahim, and I am the founder and CEO of Radiant Roots, LLC. I also have a nonprofit, Our Ancestors' Wildest Dreams, and I'm just really excited to learn about different ways of managing these two entities, following my dreams to heal and support my community, while also fundraising.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shakira. Yeah, there's how to put your dreams into the real world and bring them to life. That's great. And finally, Jahan, do you want to say hello? Yeah.
Yes, okay. Hi, I'm Jihan Hosseini. I'm a journalist and I founded Dar Haya, the website, and I'm very excited to learn about you because now Dar Haya LLC, and now I want to establish a corporation can accept grants, because my work, I feel we are exceptional because we, as a journalist, I have access to Pentagon, to State Department, to White House, and I think our role to be bridge between the United States and Arab countries. So I translated all the media that is not published in Middle East from English to Arabic, and I publish in the website. So I'm very excited to learn from you how I can improve my business. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. Great. Yes, I know some of you already have organizations. Some of you are expanding them. Also, like Jahan, I've spoken with some of you who are looking for creating a new entity in the United States and have done work in other countries. So we hope this will be useful to all of you. Let me just give anyone in the room, one or two people who just want to say hello and why you're joining today. And then I'll give it over to Margaret. So.
Well, I'm with ADAPT. We to apply political economy analysis primarily for USAID. So I think, we're very much in the world of compliance with USAID rules and regulations, but as we look to scale and get out of, we still want to continue into subcontracting role the major USAID prime implementing partners, but also looking at how to scale and become direct implementers ourselves and possibly explore the world beyond USAID.
Yeah, makes sense.
Always looking for ideas.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Hussam Ali. I am from Egypt. I'm the founder of the Egyptian Democratic Academy, 2009. And we had some kind of governmental pressure to stop us from working freely in the country since 2014. And all the team had the travel ban, and so one of our colleagues in jail. So I finally get the travel ban lifted last January. So I came here, so I visit the place. I like the idea, so I would like to be more involved to understand what's going here. The idea is very good and impressive, and I would like to know more about how you are dealing with this, how you are supporting NGOs and new businesses.
Thank you, Cynthia. Welcome. Cool. Okay, unless anyone else wants to go, no pressure, but you can keep eating here too. Let's continue, and again, we'll have more time for discussion. So please think about your questions. Just quick background, I definitely will not read all of this, but just wanted to give you some context. So again, myself and Margaret co-presenting. I've had the chance to work with lots and lots of nonprofits internationally and domestically in the US over the last 10 plus years, and social enterprises as well, focused on democracy and civic engagement work, but spanning a wide variety of kind of different approaches. And I've also studied and been really focused on connecting social entrepreneurship tools to democracy and civic engagement work. So some of the training kind of that I've gotten related to this work, has to do with tools of social innovation and social entrepreneurship that can help us not only have mission-driven organizations, but do good, but also do it well and have healthy, sustainable organizations that can be sustainable for the long term. So I'm also have had a lot of conversations like this with a lot of you in the last several months actually, which is part of why I told Margaret like we really need to do a session. So really happy to be following up today, and I'm also looking to start probably very soon a bit of a coaching or consulting business on the side, basically to like provide more of this advising, because we've done a lot of coaching on business planning, for example, for social impact with our global affiliate hubs here in Open Gov Hub. But I see a lot of demand for this and want to combine it with some leadership coaching as well. Because again, just like Shakira said, it's one thing to like have your dreams about how you're going to change the world, and then it's another to work through jump through all the hoops that it takes to actually bring this into the world and do it in a way that is nourishing and sustainable, and doesn't burn you out as well, which is a real risk. So that's a little bit of what I'm bringing to today's conversation. So finally, let me hand it now to Margaret to introduce herself, and she's going to take the first half of our presentation. So
awesome. Hello, I am Margaret. And I've spent probably the last almost 20 years now, which it kind of scares me to think that I've been working for 20 years. I started off working in politics with the C4 arms that we'll talk about in a little bit, and then moved more into the C3 world. I have worked for nonprofits of varying sizes, 50,000 to 50 million, actually Pew had 6 billion. So all different shapes and sizes, a lot domestic, several especially focused in Africa and Asia. So I have a lot of experience, especially with those two regions. I also have several of my own entities that are more for-profit. Netta mentioned that she is branching into the consulting world, and I have been doing that for a while. So I have experience creating the for-profit entities as well. I've also created nonprofit entities. I work with a group called the Unfunded List, and several years ago, that was actually the first 1023 that I filled out to establish a nonprofit in the US. I've done several more since then, but you never forget your first 1023. So I come from a long background of paperwork and accounting and just trying to dot I's and cross T's. to make sure that people can do all the great and amazing work that they're doing in a legal and resourced manner. So I will also preface this by saying I am not a CPA. I am also not an attorney. I do have an MBA and I have a lot of history of working in this field. But if you have specific tax questions, please find a tax accountant. If you have specific legal questions, please do find an attorney. We're happy to consult and work with you on some specific issues. I do feel like I need to make that disclaimer when we do these types of webinars, though, just so that no one runs off, a year from now. Margaret told me that I could deduct this on my taxes.
And we can also help refer you to some folks that others have worked with, lawyers and others. So yeah, just want to offer that.
Absolutely. Cool. So I think we're going to dive right in. And you'll hear us mention two different things today. I'm going to focus on the legal structures, and Ned is going to talk about the business. But just so that you kind of can have them in your mind when we're discussing them, your legal structure is really your formal governance structure. So it is, what type of entity are you? How are you taxed? What regulations and obligations do you have? As we'll, down the road on this presentation, we'll talk about some myths. I know there are a lot of myths associated with certain legal structures and how they can perform their business models in terms of how they raise and spend their money. So I think, but just to compare the two, legal is very formal. It is your governance structure. Business is really, how do you raise and spend your money? How do you sustain the work that you're doing? So as we talk about those, just, you can have a different legal structure and business model, and you can mix them up. You can have different business models for different legal structures. It's fun, I promise. So the first nonprofit legal structure we're going to discuss is the 501c3. It's probably the one that most people are the most familiar with. Most universities, hospitals, your run-of-the-mill charity and nonprofit is a 501c3. Right, they're performing something for the public good. There are no shareholders. There can be members, so membership organizations can be 501c3s. In terms of their governance and reporting structure, they file 990s every year. So you might go online, and one of the best ways, I'm a total geek, if I want to learn about a nonprofit and what their resources are, who their partners are, what they're working on, I go read their most recent 990. You can go to GuideStar and find them all for free. And it's a super fun way to pass an afternoon if you haven't done it. But you also have to pass what we call the public support test. So after the first 5 years, you have to show that most of your revenues are coming from the public, that you're not just being financed by one family trust or two donors. So that's really a key piece of the 501c3 is how they file their documents, their 990s, and pass the public support test. One of the key features of a C3 that makes it unique, and I think most people want this feature, is the tax exemption. People who donate to 501c3s can deduct that donation from their taxes. This is different for the C4s and other nonprofits. I write a check to the unfunded list and I can write that 100% off on my taxes. When it comes to paying taxes for the C3, they are often exempt, not payroll taxes. They absolutely have to pay payroll taxes. But if you're going out, and I work for a local theater in Alexandria, often we have to go and buy wood to build sets. We can take our tax exempt status over to Lowe's or the local Ace Hardware and not have to pay taxes on the wood and paint that we buy to build that set. Not every purchase is tax exempt in that way. A lot of companies will have very specific parameters around which you can not pay taxes, but it is a really nice feature when you have the formal federal 501c3. It's also important to note that each state is slightly different. You will have the C3 IRS notification, but then you will also have to have your nonprofit status at the state in which you're registered, and any state in which you are doing fundraising and business. And I will also, overarching caveat, there are so many other nuances to all of these structures. I'm going a little fast and kind of very high level because I want to get through a lot and I know there's a lot of questions. Absolutely, if you have questions, we can talk about them later. But know that there are levels and levels beneath what we're talking about here we could dig into. When you talk about C4, I mentioned that I started my life in campaigns. Campaigns are C4s. So if you write a check to Joe Smith for governor, you cannot deduct that from your taxes. Sometimes the C4 can be exempt from some taxes, but it's not quite as much as the C3. A lot of these are civic leagues, associations, again, political campaigns. Another tweak to this one is that they do have the ability to do some lobbying. As a C3, you are very restricted in the type of political activity, issue activity that you can perform. A C4 is not as structured in what they can do. They can actually do lobbying and some political activity. So that makes them, a little bit more unique. They also don't have shareholders, but that is, they often do have membership associations. So again, a lot more nuances you can talk about a C4, but some of the big ones are not tax exempt. They can do lobbying, and they are, just slightly different from a C4 in terms of the work that they're doing. So when we talk about, oh, that's right, we added this slide. Netta did this and it's amazing. I'm not going to go through all of it. When we pass these slides around, I encourage you to sit with this one a minute. When we talk about the fact that there are hybrid organizations, I don't think people kind of understand how many different types of legal structure you can have. One of the things that has come up a lot lately is the concept of the 509 organization. And we don't have a slide on it here because, to be 100% honest, there are so many nuances that I think it would actually just get super confusing. But if you do have questions about the public charity piece of the 509 that you may have heard about, please, meet with us afterwards and we're happy to chat you through that. It has a lot to do with the public support test and other key features. But as you notice here, there isn't one right structure. And I think that's something that you'll hear both of us talk a lot about during this whole thing, is that there isn't one right way to do everything. You really pick the model, pick the legal and the business model that works for the work that you're doing. And there is probably a structure that you can find to fit that.
And Margaret, if I can just add quickly on this slide, yeah, so you can see the source of it here, and again, we'll share the slides, but I think it's useful to zoom out and just realize, based on the federal US, IRS tax code, there's 27 different types of 501c organizations, which are all nonprofit organizations, tax exempt organizations, according to the federal government. And then even within 501c3, one of those categories, there's 5 different types of 501c3s. We can see here, the 509s, there's 4 or 5 different types of 509 categories. So again, the big picture here is these are all nonprofit entities that are recognized by the US, federal government, tax exempt entities, but how you make your money, what your purpose is, help differentiate some of the nuance here. So yeah, happy to follow up more on that later.
When we talk about there's a lot of nuance, we are so scratching the surface of what the differences are between all of these. And I think it really goes to fit what type of organization and what kind of work are you doing, and there is a model to fit that. There's a structure to fit that. One of the options that you do have, so say that you have this great idea for a nonprofit, you think you want to have a nonprofit, you don't really necessarily want to go through all of the paperwork. I mentioned the 1023 is the classic form to submit for a C3 filing with the IRS. And you're not sure maybe if that's the right fit for you, or you just need some help in order to accept donations, apply for grants, whatever, before you get the final 1023 paperwork submitted. Fiscal sponsorship could be an option for you. This is where an entity that already has their C3 status provides kind of the back-end services, usually accounting and financial services, some, just general office support for you. They also allow you to use their EIN and their C3 status. There are some big ones, Tides Foundation, Fractured Atlas, and their main thing is that other smaller nonprofits or people who want to start nonprofits can come to them, use their tax exempt status, and kind of funnel the money through these fiscal sponsors. So that means that technically all of the money is coming to this entity, and then, you know, what there is a fee associated, then they actually give the money to you to use for your concept and your idea. It does allow you to accept donations, and for the person who's writing the donation to write it off as if they were submitted it to a traditional C3. But there is usually a fee. So anywhere between 5 and 20% is what the fiscal sponsor will take. I will say there are some unique opportunities for using a fiscal sponsorship. If you do think that you want to have a C3 long-term, it is actually worth it just to go through the paperwork and to get your own, because it comes with so many other benefits. There are a lot of benefits that are tied to a single EIN, and once the fiscal sponsor uses them, you don't necessarily get that benefit. But you may actually have an instance. I work with, again, another theater. I use theaters as a lot of examples, I just realized. But one of the theaters I work with in Georgetown, we only do one show a year. It's free outdoor Shakespeare on the lawn in Georgetown. They want to accept donations. They've gotten grants in the past. We use Fractured Atlas for our fiscal sponsor. It doesn't make sense for us to set up our own 1023 nonprofit and have to do all the paperwork and back office accounting and 990 so that we can put on one $5,000 to $10,000 show a year, receive one grant and a handful of donations. It's just not worth it for the work that we're doing. So we use a fiscal sponsor. And in that case, it works out really well for everyone. There may be, again, a case you're using it kind of in between. You haven't really decided which format you want to pursue yet, but you know that you have some donors who want to fund you, or maybe you want to apply for a grant or two to see how it's going. Fiscal sponsorship could be a good kind of stopgap for you in that sense.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly too, I've been seeing this trend more here in the Open GovHub membership network. So more like there's a growing number of entities who are members with us here who are fiscally sponsored projects. So the contracts that they have with us, for example, are within the name of the fiscal sponsor. There's at least 5 out of the 65 member organizations here that are fiscally sponsored projects. And again, we've seen that this can make a lot of sense if, like right in the beginning of you want to start the work, you have projects and programs ready to go, and you do not want to be bogged down with like all of the back office support, and you find a good partner that like meets your values and they have a reasonable rate. Like that can be a great way to launch a new initiative, and maybe you stay as a fiscally sponsored project for a few years and then you spin off as a separate entity. So I've seen that journey happen a lot. And again, I think the good news is there's more and more options for fiscal sponsors. Like it's becoming a more competitive marketplace. So that also means you can get, there's more options for the rates, because there's a big range, as Margaret said, about like how much overhead the sponsor charges you because they are your legal host and, you know, doing all your financial bookkeeping and all that good stuff. So, but again, if people are interested, we can also make recommendations for fiscal sponsors that some of the members here in Open GovHub are using as well. So, cool.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go
Just
ahead.
very quickly. So the grant would go to the fiscal sponsor, not to the.
Yeah.
Group. So I've been interested in looking at doing campaigns and working with other groups trying to do campaigns. So it wouldn't be for us, but for grantees potentially, they could have this fiscal sponsor.
Right.
I think that's right. Did you hear that, Margaret? Yeah.
I think so. So for instance, I had a client a little while back who just actually got their C3 status. Woohoo, it was very exciting. But they had been fiscally sponsored for several years, and she did a ton of lobbying and was amazing grant writer to getting grants. And it always kind of took her brain a minute to kind of read through the grant agreements, because technically the grant would say between X organization and neighborhood ministries instead of her organization, because it had to go to the fiscal sponsor because they were the ones legally and financially responsible for the money. They were the one who had to report it on their 990. They're the ones who had to do all the accounting for it. It was a grant to do work for her project, for her nonprofit, but all of the paperwork had the name of the overarching fiscal sponsor nonprofit on it. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Makes sense.
Awesome, yeah, exactly. So again, it can be a good fit, like either temporarily for a couple of years or a long-term option, especially again, if you're depending on the scale that you want to operate. So, okay, let's keep going. So we'll get to business models in a second, but yeah, go ahead with the for-profit legal structure. Yeah.
I promise, I do apologize, I'm going slightly fast, but I know there's so much to cover and so many good pieces. I do want to cover the three big types of for-profit legal structures. I said that I have a couple of these, and it's interesting to kind of see how they play out on your taxes. So the traditional one is the C Corp. That is where, that's your IBMs and your Googles and, your big companies where the company itself is taxed, right? So Apple itself is going to be taxed on the revenue that it makes, not the guy in charge. There's no cap on the number of shareholders that you can have. One important piece to remember about shareholders is that they're only taxed when they receive a dividend, right? So there's a lot of conversation about wealth taxes and those sort of things. And I think that's an important piece to remember, that, you might have a bajillion shares in these big companies, but you're not making money on them until you either receive a dividend or you sell them. And at that point, that's when you're taxed, is when you actually receive money from those shares, whether it's through a dividend or through selling. The C Corp's duty is really to its shareholders. So those people who own stock in the company, the board, the governance body, is required to make decisions that will benefit those people. That is their aim. They can want to do good in the world, and that's all great, but their duty is really to the shareholders. I think this is a difference for a B Corp, where again, entity is taxed. They also have shareholders, but they have stakeholders. So you might think of this as a company that sells well-making materials that are sold in developing countries. They have the shareholders who are the people paying for the stock, who are giving money, but their stakeholders are the ones receiving the benefit of these products. Their duty is actually to the stakeholders. So they might make decisions as a governing body that will make less money for their shareholders, but if it's in the best interest of the people that they're working for, that's the decision they need to make. They also have to file an annual benefit report. So in addition to just doing traditional taxes, they have to show, how have we done well this year? Have we done good and well? And I think that's an important piece of this as well, is that they actually have to show that they're adding benefit to society by being a B Corp. So I think it's an important distinction there. They have similar tax structures, but they have different duties to stakeholders versus shareholders. The S Corp is one that probably a lot of people in this room who do any sort of consulting or working on their own either have on the side or have seen. This is where you have a pass-through for taxes. So in my instance, JM Strategies, which is one of the groups here today, does not pay taxes. So any money that JM makes during the year, it does not pay taxes on that revenue. Instead, my business partner Jody and we pay taxes. That revenue is passed directly through to us, and I claim half of it on my taxes every year. Usually you'll see these with LLC at the end, LLP. You have a sole proprietorship. So Bluebird Strategies is mine. It's only me. It's a sole proprietorship. I pay taxes on it solely. JM Strategies is a partnership. There are two of us, and so we pay taxes on it jointly. Often people will do this, even if they're just by themselves, because it does limit the liability. It's a limited liability company. It limits the liability to your personal assets. If something were to happen to you as the consultant or the worker, any recourses could be limited to what the actual entity has and not what you as a person have. So it's very popular for those sort of consultants and whatnot. So, and again, this is just another way of showing that there are a bajillion hybrids out there. And you can have, nonprofits who sell things and for-profits who get grants and like tribal corporations. I mean, there are so many hybrids that once you figure out exactly what you're doing, and we'll have some questions at the end to kind of help guide you to decide this and kind of figure this out for yourself. But there's a model to fit everything. So don't get freaked out, you know, if one doesn't feel like it fits you perfectly.
Yeah, and this graphic, by the way, comes from something called the Fourth Sector Group, who has actually been a virtual member for Open GovHub for a long time. They have some great resources about like how they're trying to build more of the fourth sector for people who are, again, kind of in between the traditional private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. So yeah, obviously there's been huge growth of like B corporations, for example, in the last several years, but also keeping in mind that like cooperatives are a governance structure that have existed for a long, long time in many, many countries. And also represent this blending of social impact and also financial sustainability and employee ownership and all that good stuff. So yeah, lots of options. Okay, cool. Margaret, do you want to add a final word or good on that?
I will turn it over to you. And I'm sure there's questions. We'll get to them when we get to them.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, I want to do a little snapshot again, just for today about like business models for social impact organizations. I'm really passionate about this topic because I started my career, you know, in a traditional nonprofit working on a grant-funded project, and we had an amazing funder. But then I came to work at Open GovHub, which is a nonprofit social enterprise, and I just felt so liberated by like running a business with a social mission, because the more that I'm fulfilling my social mission here at Open GovHub, the more it's supporting our financial sustainability. So I'll talk a little more about kind of what example, what model we have here and how you can think about this. But always, I want to encourage people to think a little bit outside of the box and recognize that there are ways that you can earn money sustainably to fund a social mission. So it's just a matter, again, of matching the values that you have and impact and the skills that you have with sustainable business models to fuel that work. So there's lots of great resources publicly available. Models of Impact is one that I encourage people to look at. They have like a business canvas for social impact organizations, which I like to use in some trainings that we've done with affiliate hubs, for example. And again, this is just one example, but I like the visual reminder that the business model, the big question of where does our funding come from and how are we going to sustain our work, should align and connect you know, the funding stream with the social impact that you're seeking. So there's lots of different ways to do this. And again, this is just one snapshot of different ways to combine the impact that you're seeking, the programs that you're running, with also the sources of income that you're receiving. I won't go into detail here because actually the next slide, I think, will give you a little bit of an easier summary overview, like especially to ease into this topic because there's many different models. But I really like this framework called the 4 S's, to think about, again, what are some common ways I can think about developing a business model when I want to have a positive social impact in my work. So the first S in the 4 S's is selling. So this is maybe the simplest version, and it can work really well if your customers are basically the same group of stakeholders as your beneficiaries. So in other words, the people who you're trying to have a social impact on, it's the same group of people who can also pay for services that you provide them, products or services. So this is actually the model basically for Open GovHub. Our customer base is also our key stakeholders. So we are funded by the membership fees that the 65 member organizations here are paying us. And so again, the more satisfied our members are with the services that they're providing, the more that fuels the financial sustainability, and the more our members are being more effective, the more we are fulfilling our own social mission. So it's kind of a nice, again, alignment where those two groups are connected. And I feel like a very natural sense of accountability, right, to our members, because again, they're the ones who we want to have even more impact in the world. And they're also the ones paying my salary, just to be very, transparent about it. So it feels nice compared to, many nonprofits. Obviously you can have your beneficiaries are over here, you're over here, and then your donor is somewhere over here, right? So you're always kind of trying to square the circle and make sure everyone is happy and in agreement with what's happening. And sometimes that can be difficult. But again, of course, the selling model, it can't work in every circumstance. But it's really good to consider if you are lucky enough where, again, the beneficiaries that you want to serve also have the ability to pay, whether at the full price or at a reduced price for the services that you provide them. Okay, so the next S is sourcing. So this is another really common model where basically the beneficiaries, again, the social group you want to support, are actually the producers of the products or services that you are helping them sell. So a lot of like, fair trade, free trade kind of, not free trade, fair trade market places support this. And there's a lot of great social enterprises that are, basically creating new markets for, women trade unions in Morocco selling argan oil, for example, and bringing them to new markets in the US. Like there's all kinds of ways that, again, you as an organization might be having a social impact because you're helping, people like disadvantaged groups or so on sell their products and services into new markets, and you're kind of the bridge. So that's a common example of like a sourcing business model for social impact. The third type is staffing. This is the case where the beneficiaries, you basically hire them as your employees. So I've also seen some examples of this. For example, there's an amazing bakery in New York City who only hires immigrant women of color, and they all bring their recipes from their homelands into this bakery in New York City. So again, it all depends obviously on what is your social mission, and also what are the products or services that you can offer the world, and what is the relationship between the customers and the beneficiaries, basically. And again, there's more variations of this, but I think this is a nice, the 4 S's is a good way to ease into the topic. And then finally, sharing is another very common model that you'll see a lot, where basically there's no connection between the customers and the beneficiaries, but the company or the organization is just reserving a portion of its profits and then donating those profits to have a social impact. So like, whatever, Tom's Shoes and the 1-for-1 model, like it is a version of this where, again, like the customers might not have any connection to the beneficiaries, but what they're paying for a typical product or service, some of that money gets set aside basically to donate, to communities in need, basically. So again, selling, sourcing, staffing, and sharing are all 4 really useful ways to think about, again, who am I serving? And also who can pay for services and products that I can offer? And how can I connect them in some sustainable way? Okay, and again, sorry, we're moving fast, but we want to hear your questions. So, okay. Real quick, this is part of the recap, true or false statements. Maybe we'll do a few of these. Just anyone can shout it out, but statement number 1, nonprofits cannot sell products or earn their own money. True or false? What do you all think?
Oh,
Yes. Boo. Okay. Correct. False. Statement number 2, for-profits cannot receive grants.
False.
Also false. Yep. I appreciate Margaret's gestures. Number 3, nonprofits cannot make money or have a positive net income at the end of the year. Also false. Yes, correct. And then finally, there's only one structure that is right for my mission-driven organization.
False.
Yeah, I think we would say false. Yeah, again, we want to encourage you to think about the universe of options, and again, how do you like match the puzzle pieces together? So, okay, great. So these are just a few examples. I don't want to go into them now. Yeah, I think it'll be better to do discussion, but again, just local, DC-based examples of different ways that you can operate as a hybrid organization, really connecting, funding, your legal structure, and having a social impact. Okay.
I'll say one thing about that really fast is it's also, if you look into the 734 coffee, a good example of someone who thought they had the right model and had to do a tweak because they originally started as a nonprofit, realized they couldn't sustain what they wanted to be able to do as a nonprofit, switch to a for-profit model, and it's working marvelously. So I think also just a good example of there isn't just one right model, and you can actually make course corrections along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Awesome. So yeah, a couple more just quick points. So again, I know some of you who invited today are thinking about, like, you have an existing organization in Nigeria, in Egypt, and some other countries, and you're creating a new US entity. So in those situations, we just encourage you again to think about a few key questions for what is the purpose of this, right? Like why would you establish a new entity in the US? How might you have domestic activities which influence the legal structure that you end up having, because it's based again on the purpose of your organization. And then, of course, as Margaret already mentioned, you need to think both about like the national, US federal level registration with the IRS, but also potentially with the DOJ, for example, if you're doing political work, as well as the state or, state level incorporation and registration, whether it's in DC or another state here in the US. So there's more to say here, but just a quick snapshot about this to help you start the process. Okay, so to finish the presentation, and please do start to share your questions in the chat for those of you who are on Zoom, and then we'll start to take some in person here as well. But I think to recap, I'll run through these really quick. First and kind of most important question, don't skip this step before you set off on the long journey to create a new organization, is thinking about like, is there really an unmet need? Like, is this work already being done in some capacity? Does it really make sense for me to create a brand new organization? If there really is an unmet need in the world, there's a problem that's not being solved, then absolutely go for it. But again, just know that it is a long journey. So if there is already some of this work being done, maybe there's a way that you can have a partnership or something to support it. Question number 2, where can I find funding first? This is actually exactly an important distinction. As Margaret said, there's many instances where an organization could have easily become a company when they became a nonprofit, or they could have easily become a nonprofit when they became a company. Like Zipcar is an example I learned in one of my business school classes, right? Where it just depended on the first source of investment. So Zipcar became a for-profit company, but they have a social mission related to environment, and that's okay. Like, I think it's good to just accept that there's a bit of coincidence, but really try to be strategic about right now, where do I think I'm most likely to find my first sources of funding, whether it's private investors, grants, crowdfunding, whatever it looks like, because that will probably set the tone for the structure that you end up having. Question number 3, what structure could help you attract the right people? Staff, volunteers, etc., because talent is so important for any organization to really set you up for success. Number 4, also, what partnerships do I need to be successful that can complement the work that I'm doing? There can be lots of creative ways to get access, again, to different markets or stakeholders through partnerships, not just doing it yourself. And then number 5, really important, what is your end game? Like in the long term, what does success look like for your vision? And then how can you plan backwards from that vision and choose the right model for you? Because, for example, if your end game is you're trying to provide a public service that you think government should be providing, you might be more successful doing that as a nonprofit than as a company. So there's different questions to ask yourself, but these we think are kind of a good roadmap to consider. Okay, great. So let's, I'll share this again at the end, but I want to make sure we go into the discussion, and then we'll close, with some takeaways and a feedback survey. I don't see any questions in the chat. So anyone online, if you want to put a question in the chat or raise your hand, that will help us make sure we can hear from anyone. And while you do that, I'll start with those of us in the room here. Maybe just a show of hands for folks who have questions. Okay, a couple, yeah. So
Okay.
I'll take a few questions at once and then we'll respond.
I've been hearing all my life about 501c3s and 501c4s.
Okay.
I want to know about the others.
Yes. Yeah, good question. So, okay, so let's take a couple questions at one time and then respond. So let's see, I saw Martin, do you want to go next?
Where do cooperatives fit in?
Yes.
And then anything on the culture and kind of more soft stuff related to organization building? Resources, funds.
Cool. Can you say a little more about the second part? Like what the question is like, are there certain structures which are good for certain?
Yeah, I guess
Organization
certain environments,
culture.
like for example, virtual collaboration, cross-cultural, different people coming together.
Okay, yep. Awesome. And then Hussein, did you have another question?
Yeah, I'm here as a visitor to the States. So what is my options?
Yeah. Yeah, so like what options for non-citizens? Yeah.
No green card, no
Yeah.
residence.
Awesome. Okay,
All right.
sounds.
I think I have a question too. Basically,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's more about the fiscal sponsorship. Can you do a fiscal sponsorship for an organization based out of the US? Is that possible? And what would the rules look like so that you don't fall into IRS trouble? And the other thing is when it comes to your filing with IRS, is that something you can do by yourself alone? Or is it something you guess best to get a tax attorney or a tax expert for? Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, let's have a pause. Margaret, do you want to start with some of the more legal questions? So yeah, IRS options for filing, and then tell us about the other options besides C3 and C4.
Sure. No, I don't think we have enough time to go into all the options that are not C3 or C4. That's a whole probably other separate conversation. I do think that, you know, we talked about the 509A2 as being a distinct subset of the C3. A lot of that has to do with the public support test. So I think, you know, if you have questions about that, I'm happy to chat with you offline about other models, knowing that there are, again, 27 different ones that we could pick from. The question at the end is sticking in my mind about the fiscal sponsorship, and I think it overlaps a little bit with the question about what someone who is not a legal resident can do. If you're, I'm again not an attorney, especially not an immigration attorney, so I'm not 100% sure what someone without a U.S. Social Security number or identification number could do. You do need that to file and get an EIN, which is the employer identification number you would need to start any type of entity. So that is a question that Netta's husband may actually be really well positioned to answer. But I do know that you do need a number from the US to apply for an EIN that will allow you to apply for any entity, whether it's for profit or nonprofit. In terms of being fiscally sponsored abroad, I do know there are some fiscal sponsors in the US who will take on international clients. They'll do, if you do that, they will do all the back end paperwork for you in terms of filing your IRS paperwork. They will include you on their 990. Again, that means that all the donations, all the grants go to them, and then they kind of disperse it to you. So in terms of the actual paperwork on your part, it would come down to what the fiscal sponsor needs from you and what your responsibilities are to that sponsor. Every sponsor is going to be a little different in terms of the scope of what they provide, how much they allow you to do or not do, what paperwork they need from you or not. But in terms of IRS filings, if you are fiscally sponsored, that is one of the nice things, and why it is a nice option if you haven't done all the paperwork yet or you are still thinking about it. They do all the IRS paperwork for you on their end. If you want to step your own, you have to do all the paperwork on your own. And in that case, I would actually hire an accountant just because they do actually have a lot of history with an accountant or an attorney, because they have a lot of history with filing these and can kind of usually help navigate those waters more easily.
Yeah, and I'll just add to a couple of the other questions. So cooperatives is a great question. Again, this is getting a bit into the weeds, but I know one of our member organizations is an ESOP. So it's an employee stock ownership, something. It's a form of an S corporation, but with employee ownership. So there's, again, kind of, I think, a whole spectrum of formats that you might have with cooperative ownership of the company. But I think that also relates to your other question, Martin, about like culture, like organizational culture. You know, in the end, I don't think the legal structure itself is going to have a huge influence on like the day-to-day culture. That's much more set, obviously, by the people that are working in the organization and like the norms of how you work together. But there's definitely some nice options if you do want to have like more decentralized ownership, even of some small components of, even if there's not big dividends, right? But ownership of what the organization is producing, that can be obviously a nice signal to employees that they're not just some small part of the equation, but they really have a stake in its success. So yeah, again, lots more to say about all of these things, but I see in the chat also a question about tax benefits of a 509A2. I think if it's my understanding correctly, because it is a form of a nonprofit entity recognized by the IRS, the tax exemption continues. But Margaret, do you want to add anything more?
So it depends a little bit, and this is not what I know like is my first love, but there is a difference in the amount that you can deduct based on like a gross income. For some, it can be like 60%, for others, it's 30%. So there is a distinction in the tax benefit of a 509A2 versus a traditional 501c3. A lot of that, again, the determination of that, naming is going back to the public support test. We talked a little bit about having to show that at least a third of your donors, a third of your income comes from a variety of donors. So again, if you want to talk more about 509A2s offline, happy to chat about that. But it is having to do with the deduction to a private foundation, and 9A2 is usually limited about 30%, but 60% for a traditional C3.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay, this is another, this may be an IRS question, so I'll leave it. Who am I talking to?
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's good. Yeah.
I know Margaret said that if you write a check to a 501c3, you can take it off your taxes.
Right.
I do that all the time.
Uh-huh.
And I can only take it off my taxes if I file a Schedule A.
Mhm.
And we file a Schedule A if my total deductions are going to be more than my standard deduction. Which basically means it only works for people who make a certain amount of income. People make all that income are never going to file a Schedule A.
Yeah.
So are there any incentives or benefits to, I'm going to say, more moderate income people for donating to a nonprofit?
Yeah, good question.
Besides feeling good in your heart, I will say that is a conundrum, and that is definitely a tax and IRS question. Unfortunately, you're right. It's something that I just personally, before I got married, even though I donated all over the place, I often didn't hit the percent above which it would make sense for me to actually itemize my donations and not just take a standard deduction. Now that I'm married, actually, we do hit that cap, and we can, but it unfortunately is just something with the tax code as it stands right now, that it is more beneficial for certain individuals to actually itemize their deductions. And unfortunately, if it's not above a certain threshold, it doesn't make sense, because it actually costs you money to file that schedule. So now you're paying to actually take more deductions. So you are correct in that. And there isn't a great answer other than it's the tax code at present.
By any chance, is there any, is it floating around in the tax committees of Congress to do anything about this, or is it just out of the question?
I honestly, I'm not 100%. I wouldn't speak to the going on in the tax committee right now. I know it's been an issue for a while, and it comes up again and again. So, maybe they will get to it someday. The tax code changes every year.
Yeah. Yeah, and just a quick point on that, sorry, and we'll wrap up in just a moment. I do think, at least from a larger scale perspective, I know many other countries do not have the same culture of philanthropy as the United States. And I think it's actually, on a high scale like that, that's actually, the tax code is a big reason why we have a robust civil society in the US, even again, if it doesn't impact everyone equally. So I think that's something, I know I've talked to some colleagues in other countries where they're like, oh, like if we had something like this could help us have more of a culture of local philanthropy instead of always getting our funds from international donors. So anyway, just let's take one more question and then do a recap. I put a feedback survey in the chat too for those of you online, and would love your feedback here too. So yeah.
Hopefully this helps others, because we've looked at the S Corp status versus just remaining an LLC without any of these, without going C Corp, B Corp. So what is the main advantage to taking the S Corp status versus just remaining an LLC without S Corp status?
And it's probably a slightly longer conversation than like the 1 minute we have. And so an LLC is a type of S Corp. So that's, part of where the conversation gets a little hairy. So, I mean, yeah, it's probably a slightly longer conversation than this right here.
Cool. Well, at least on that note, yeah, we did want to make sure to leave you with a couple next steps. So again, definitely this was meant to be a bit of a primer. Yeah, and both Margaret and I would love to stay in touch with you all. Please do complete this feedback survey. So for those of you in the room, you can use my laptop in just a minute to fill it before you leave, where we'll ask you about, like, are you interested in follow-up support? If so, we could look into one-to-one sessions, or structuring it based on like certain outcomes, like help me file this thing, or broad questions, right? And again, Margaret mentioned, but my partner, my husband happens to be a lawyer who does pro bono, has done pro bono registration for nonprofits incorporating in DC. And so he's also kind of part of the team. And again, we'd love to follow up because I know this can get nuanced really quickly. There's tons of other publicly available resources on legal structures, business models, fundraising, some of which we've named here. And again, definitely encourage you to reach out to us, to use these resources, and to complete the feedback survey, which is in the chat for folks online. And finally, this is just a bit of a recap. Again, I won't talk through all of it now, just to respect everyone's time, but there's many different nonprofit legal options, many different for-profit legal options, which could suit you very well. And there's important ways to think about how you might earn income as part of your funding model. And so know that there's an approach out there that is good for you. It might change over time, whether you start with a fiscal aid sponsor as a project of a fiscal sponsor and grow, for example. But really try to focus first and foremost on like, what is the unmet need in the world that I'm filling? And if it's not unmet, then maybe don't go on this journey, because there's a lot of work to be done to set up a new entity. And then where is the first source of funding likely to come from for me? Because that will probably set the tone. If it's more likely to be grants, become a nonprofit. If it's more likely to be private investors, become a company type of thing. And think about staff partners and your end goal to support this. So sorry that it was a real whirlwind here. I think Margaret and I can stick around, but I did want to kind of officially wrap up for those of you who need to head out. Again, please go ahead, fill the feedback survey in the chat, and I'll have it here on the computer for those of you in person. Margaret, do you want to say any final word?
Yeah, just thank you guys. This is fun. I know I got a little in the weeds and I apologize, I went a little long. Definitely feel free to reach out. I love to chat with people about especially strategies and thinking through, what they want to achieve and maybe the best model to help them achieve that. So please reach out, and I look forward to hopefully chatting with some more of you.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Wish you a wonderful weekend, and just hope you all, stay encouraged in the work that you're doing. It's not easy, but it's really exciting when you can, again, identify a need in the world that no one is filling and really work to have a social impact and do it in a sustainable structure. So just wish you all the best. We're excited to stay in touch and provide some follow-up support if that's what you're looking for. So take care. Thank you so much.